Today we're going to be discussing how startups, emerging and early stage startups, can be leveraged by large organizations to help accelerate their innovation. So great segue that Jason gave towards the end there. Cliff, that was well placed. Thank you. That was a great little plug for KPMG Ventures. So my name's Andrew Matuszak. I lead KPMG Ventures, and it's my honor and privilege to lead the discussion today. So what I'd like to do first is I want to introduce the panel, and then we'll set the stage and we'll get right into the questions. So first, we've got Adam Branch. Adam is the CEO of Rhino.ai, and Adam's just been at the forefront, his last few companies and Rhino as well, leveraging AI and generative AI at large organizations. So brings a very unique perspective as a successful entrepreneur working with large organizations and emerging tech. So Adam, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Nick from Differential Ventures. Nick is also a very successful venture capitalist and someone who's been investing for quite some time now in companies, young, promising companies that have the potential to have a significant impact at large organizations. So, looking for Nick to provide his perspective on some of the challenges and opportunities as he's seen, kind of sitting in between the startups and the large organizations, on what's worked well and some of the opportunities to improve. So, also, Nick, thank you for joining.
Thanks, man.
Gamiel Gran, my friend Gamiel. Gamiel is the Chief Commercial Officer at Mayfield Fund and has a passion, I would say, for corporate innovation.
Sure do.
He has been driving corporate innovation both with startups as well as with CXOs. Hundreds of CXOs actually have sought out Gamiel for his advice and guidance and how to apply and how to use startups within large organizations. In fact, actually, a little plug for Gamiel, he's developed a playbook called the 3 I's of corporate innovation. It is ideation, incubation, and investment. So a little plug for Gamiel. Thank you for joining as well.
Great to be here.
Karen Wang from Deutsche Bank. Karen invests in enterprise emerging companies for enterprise software. Very interesting too, and I just want to say, I'll just start off and say I'm very impressed with how Deutsche Bank has integrated their CVC into the leadership and how they leverage startups. And Karen, what I'm really looking for, kind of as we ask some of the questions, is your perspective on how regulations are impacting the adoption of some of these emerging technologies. So excellent. So, and I know there's been a lot of travel challenges, so I just want to acknowledge too, appreciate everyone's patience in dealing with what appears to be some airline chaos in getting out here. So appreciate you joining. So what I'd like to do is set the stage and kind of give a background for the discussion. And so what I want to do is I want to call your attention to one of the themes that I think we've heard throughout this morning, and that's the pace of change, the pace of technological change continues to accelerate. And it's that continuing acceleration that's putting tremendous pressure on especially some of the larger enterprise or legacy organizations to try to stay ahead of the curve and more often than not, just try to keep pace. And I think that some of the traditional innovation approaches that we're all familiar with have been falling short recently in the face of some of the disruptive technologies that we're seeing, as well as some of the new, more agile competitors that are emerging. And I think this is where some of the relationships between large organizations and these emerging and early stage startups can come into play and provide benefit. And we all know, I mean, it's clear, obviously, that startups are inherently agile and innovative by definition. They bring this unique perspective. They like these cutting-edge technologies that we'll hear about in a little bit that can greatly impact and benefit a large organization. And I think if that's done correctly, and I think, you know, as Jason pointed out, there's ways to do it correctly. If it's done correctly, it's a way for a large enterprise to begin to learn how to adapt more quickly to market changes, some emerging challenges that are coming up, and sometimes even, I'll say, explore new business models. But there are some risks to these relationships. I think there's been countless cautionary tales, and we're all familiar with, of investments and partnerships that just seem to fail or falter due to some cultural clash or some misaligned goals. And I think actually the most important thing is probably, I'll say, inadequate value realization strategies. And so all of those failures underscore the importance of what we're going to talk about today, which is about setting clear expectations and realistic expectations, establishing good communication between the parties, and probably most importantly, aligning on the strategic objectives of why you're getting into this relationship to begin with. I'll also point out just before we begin that I do think that the relationship between startups and large enterprises are much more than just about gaining access to some new technology. I think it's about creating a culture of collaboration. It's about driving innovation, and it's about continuous improvement. And if it's done correctly, I think it can add tremendous value to both organizations. It's truly a symbiotic relationship between the two. So with that, I'd love to dive in, and I'm going to start off. And I'm going to start actually, if I don't mind, I'm going to start, Nick, with you. As a venture capitalist, as someone that's kind of been in the middle of both relationships and kind of given our audience and what we've been talking about today, I think we'd all love to hear your perspective as you're evaluating startups from an investment perspective, how you're taking a look at them and saying, how you're gauging whether or not those startups have the potential to be impactful, and kind of walk us through that process. Then also say, if you don't mind, kind of add on to that, if you could provide some examples of some of the successful collaborations that you've seen throughout your career.
Yeah, sounds great. So I think important to contextualize a little bit. The term venture capital gets bastardized a lot, and it means a few different things. If you just simply break it down to early stage and late stage, we are very much early stage investors. We're usually the first institutional money into a company, on our marketing collateral, call it, coming out of commercialization or the point of commercialization. So Series B, Series C, when the bigger funds come in, they're investing behind growth and scale, right? We're still looking to do that, but at an earlier phase. So we think about innovation. For us, that means we're looking 5 and 10 years out down the road. And being too early or too late into that game is as good as being wrong. So it's, hence why early stage investing has a lot more failure to it. But, we round that out in the portfolio, but we're looking for good partnerships. So first of all, what are we looking for? There are basically 3 things that we're trying to solve, just big picture. One is processes that are extremely manual and repetitive. Labor shortages in certain sectors or areas, and then margin compression from competitors, from supply chain, from others, right? So big picture, those are the problems we're trying to solve through our portfolio companies investing. How do we find them? Well, in today's world, it's a combination of inbound and outbound strategies. On the inbound side of things, we have partnerships with angel investors, incubators, accelerators, corporates and friends that are in the corporate venture arm or lines of business that send us stuff all the time that they're thinking about or working on. And then other VCs who are either later than us or earlier than us, or sometimes riding along parallel in terms of their theme and thesis. That's where we get the bulk of our high quality inbound stuff. In today's age, venture capital is very much eating its own dog food at this point and implementing a lot more data into our processes of how do we go out and find high quality prospective founders as early in their journey as possible to get to know them before they have really scaled and hit the radar of every other early stage fund, or kind of find something unique that we view through the way that we would then ultimately evaluate and then arbitrage that company into our network. So that's the other secret of seed investing is, little later stage stuff. Gamiel comes in, helps these guys scale a lot more. But at the early stage, we're looking at certainly team, product, market, all need to be there through our analysis. But I think the other secret is we're looking for arbitrage, and that's can we get this company to the top of the stack of what somebody at KPMG or Amex or Citadel is thinking about. Because we have those relationships. That's very important.
Yeah.
Where have I seen these things work pretty well? Lots of things. I think in our portfolio, I've seen things that are just critical. From companies like Private AI that are finding PII data, making that available for training models, and then still being able to decrypt the data when it comes back from the training process is hugely important. Everybody will need it in the training process. Companies that are doing manufacturing, adding value to the processes in a highly regulated, cost-sensitive, unionized market, finding ways to integrate AI and computer vision and automate processes there is key, especially as the U.S. looks to bring a lot more manufacturing back home. And electrical engineering. We're creating a lot more devices. We're looking to compete with China and Taiwan, other parts of the world around designing and creating chips and other IoT devices faster, more competitively. And the reality of the electrical engineering market is it's a lot of 60-year-old, mostly white guys that are looking to retire in not too distant future. And the talent pool just isn't there to backfill that. So looking at AI to fill into that and partner with the big companies that are creating the chips, doing the foundry and fab process. I think one of the best examples I've been a part of that's not in our portfolio, but in my operational career before I joined the dark side here of venture capital, a company called O-Power, where we were in the utility space and working with utilities to engage customers and reduce energy efficiency at the residential level. So you're talking tens of millions of homes around the world. Company went from 0 to IPO in 7 years. You don't see that much anymore. Average time to IPO now is like 13 years. So what they did so well was they, instead of trying to compete with the utilities, which at that point in time there were tons of companies coming in saying, trying to disrupt utilities, take over that customer relationship, O-Power came in and wrapped a big hug around all the utilities. And I think what made them most successful, beyond all the great technology and people and sales work they did, was we understood the regulatory environment of each and every utility and found ways to adjust our program to fit into that, into their environment. Because the energy policy in Virginia or Georgia or Florida is a lot different than it is up in Massachusetts or Connecticut.
Yeah.
So I think that was key, and everything. O-Power had no brand recognition. You get your energy report from whoever your utility is, PG&E or Con Ed or whatever, and there's a little tiny logo at the bottom that said powered by O-Power. But it worked at scale, and it made them hugely, hugely successful very, very quickly.
No, I love the example. It's a collaborative effort too, right, between O-Power and the utilities, as opposed to approaching it in an adversarial stance.
It's like, I compare it to if somebody came to Blockbuster and said, hey, we'll run and operate all of these, mailing DVDs around for you, and then ultimately we'll put everything to the cloud, and you start streaming it. Be a very different story today.
That's right, yeah. Well, excellent. Along the same lines, actually, I'm going to jump around a little bit because I think you brought up an interesting point about the regulatory environment. So, Karen, if you don't mind, I mean, one of the things that is, two incredible things about Deutsche Bank. One, the way that you integrate the startups into kind of the services, and I'd love to hear about that and your perspective on it. But maybe just to start off, kind of your perspective on the regulatory environment that you're facing within Deutsche Bank, and that you're seeing more broadly, and how that's affecting kind of the adoption and the use, and and what we can learn from kind of how Deutsche Bank, being at the forefront of a lot of this, is reacting to both new regulation as well as, in some cases, the lack of regulation.
So as a bank, we are a regulated entity, so regulation is super important to us. One of the most pivotal aspects that we have to consider before we make investments and adopt these startups. So through our AI Oversight Forum, we have a group that manages and oversees all AI use cases and solutions to ensure that we're monitoring it and tracking it and checking to make sure it's utilized in a safe and appropriate manner. We're conducting risk analysis to make sure we are getting all the applicable information that's needed. And the regulatory environment is changing every day. So there's always new laws coming out. Like, how are we ensuring that we make all these regulations a part of our processes? So as we go through this process, we are ensuring that we meet all the regulations.
Are you finding, and just kind of pulling on that thread a bit, given that Deutsche Bank's global footprint, can you expand a little bit on kind of where you see, and especially we'll put it in the context of kind of generative AI, since that's topical and we've been talking about it for the last day. Where you see obviously the EU and the US and kind of others, and just your perspective as you're thinking about investing in companies, and how that influences both the investment in those startups as well as the potential adoption of the technologies that they bring to the table.
Right. So when we look at AI startups, we have to make sure that they are complying with the standard policies and the regulations. So, I mean, recently we've worked with, through our Entrepreneur in Residence program, where we get to work with early stage startups, pre-seed and seed stage. We're working with them to ensure that they provide and are having the regulatory aspects that a bank needs. Because enterprises, they need all these regulations, we have to go through the processes to make sure that it complies with us. And a lot of younger startups, they don't have this foundation, right? So we're working together with them to ensure that they have it. That way they can work with big banks like us and other financial institutions.
Gamiel, you know, it's interesting. I pull on that one too, because I think what I heard there too is there's a lot of, you know, and one of the things you and I have been talking about a lot lately is the fact that oftentimes these tend to be proof of concepts and pilot programs, and as Karen mentioned, talking about kind of adopting and adapting that startup to work within that regulatory environment. One of the questions I had, kind of maybe a good segue to this one, would be, you know, as you're seeing it, especially in your role as the Chief Commercial Officer, right? And you know, one of the problems I think that folks, at least that I've spoken to, and it might be shared more broadly here, is that you're seeing a lot of the pilots rolled out. And it could be multiple startups running pilots at the same organization, might turn into proof of concepts, or the proof of concepts might turn into pilots, and they're all hoping that it's going to turn into something bigger. One of the challenges, I think, of working with startups for a large organization is how do you turn kind of that broad-based experiment from something that's ad hoc into something that's more systemic and more durable, and actually move some of that into production so that you can start to see some of those returns that you're hoping for as a large organization.
Yeah, I was reacting to Karen's comment about how sharing your insight around SEC governance, for instance, is a skill set. Just to build off this, you know, I think there's a balance between the skill set of a large corporation and a startup who is eager to run fast, wants those design relationships, but needs that deep domain knowledge that you and this example, I think, bring. We, as a fund, you know, we've been around 50 plus years. I've created this amazing job for myself where I get to jump in as an operator to help these early stage companies. And in doing so, I get to meet corporate innovation teams who say, you know, to be honest, we're pretty bad at innovating. And they look for ideas, which is where the 3 I's thing came from that I sort of built over the last 16 years. And it really is about being, frankly, honest about what your first principles are and what your weaknesses are. And those that pretend to be venture capitalists or pretend to be startups themselves have to get true with their first principles to say, you know, what our core skills are. And in this case, you know, SEC regulation at scale, global banking. Okay, little startup doesn't have those skills, but wow, that's PhD level knowledge. If we can bring those two together, we create magic. And those are the perfect design relationships that we try to find. So I do have this great network of CXOs who are sort of lean forward. We want to learn about innovation, but we're honest about what we're not good at. Yeah. I think that, you know, what been a lot of great conversations today. So Cliff and Steve and Andrew, thank you for hosting such a great event. I love this topic. I am passionate about it, as you say. We've been talking about innovation for a number of years, broadly, these technology events, and it's included in our annual reports. AI is sort of, okay, this is serious now. It's no longer a game. It's no longer just put it in your annual report. You're going to have to get competitive about it. And I always tell teams that I meet with, is your innovation process more competitive than your peers? And are you challenging yourself and being truly honest? Do you do it better and faster? So if I brought you a startup, would they say, yeah, I want to work with you because you're better at this? You'll give me reactions quickly. You'll be the right design partner for me. You'll engineer with me. You'll educate me. And in the end, to your original question, we'll create a design reference partnership that allows you to stand on stage with me at our user conference as a lighthouse reference. That's the bank of the future. Yeah. We did it with Deutsche Bank at the early days, 12 months ago. And so challenge yourself, is your innovation capacity way better than your competition? And what are you doing to engineer against that? So.
Yeah, actually, I would love to tie that right back to the very first speaker this morning. We're talking about kind of innovation at the edge versus the innovation in the core. Given just your proximity to so many CXOs and kind of seeking out your guidance on corporate innovation, what's your thought on Salim's kind of perspective there?
It has to be at the edge, generally because the compensation or the metric matters. And what I've always seen is that the core metric for business leadership, CEO, board, et cetera, can't afford, and I forget what Salim said, 70, 30, 10 or something, 70% is the core business. You can't have everybody innovating at the same level and engineering perfect science to innovate it all the way to that design success story that I just created or just illustrated. But a certain portion of the organization can. Yeah. The rest of the organization, the senior leadership, has to have a piece of that, but not all of it. So I think there is this balance of how to measure it to be successful. And it comes down to me to that measurement almost at a personal level. Is the CEO, is the board of directors, is the C-suite actually compensated for breakthrough innovation? And this is where I pull back and go, so why are you innovating? And what are you innovating for? Is it innovating generally or for very specific, the future of our business in very specific areas that the rest of the organization understands are important to the organization or the organization's future? And if so, if it's so important, then put comp behind it.
So, Adam, all right. Turning now from, okay, so we heard from Nick and Gamiel from a VC perspective and Karen from a large enterprise perspective. Now, as a founder, right, multiple companies, and now with Rhino, working hand in hand with some of these largest organizations, integrating generative AI solutions, what's your perspective on kind of hearing the other side of the coin, right? Of looking at it from what works well, and kind of, if I'd love to tie in too, like your perspective on kind of innovating at the edge versus the core, because I imagine there's a bit of tension or potential conflict there, right? As a startup, you want to work with the larger organization as a whole. Yeah. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that, given especially how all the success that you've had with your startups.
Yeah, thank you. To Gamiel's point, so from this side, our challenge is a little bit different. So as a startup, especially in a new space, it's really hard to convince a customer to take a chance on something new. Like, it's not the technology that's the challenge, it's the policies and the change management, right? And kind of wanting to take a chance on something, a new company comes along, and kudos to the KPMG team for being very first adopter of our platform and basically proving it out that it actually works, which gave us some credibility in the space. To now the customers are starting to say, oh wow, if KPMG's behind you, they must have done their diligence, so you must be more than just vaporware. And so having that, crossing that chasm really helped establish some credibility in the space.
What are some of the, given obviously the audience, right, that, a lot of large organizations and senior executives, what are some of the things, that oftentimes maybe get missed, right, as you're talking about creating this relationship between startups and large enterprises? What are some of the ingredients that you would say go into making it a successful relationship?
Honesty is obviously, key, right? You kind of have to be honest both with yourself and with the folks you're working with, because a lot of times if you're oversell something, you only have one shot at it, and then even if you overshoot by just a little bit, your credibility is shot. Like, an Accenture can screw up royally and turn back around and win a massive contract with that same agency. We missed something very small, and you're out the door. So you kind of have to balance those things out.
Yeah, setting the clear expectations of making them realistic, right? Yeah. So certainly. Now, we have about 5 minutes left in the panel, and one of the things I think everyone wants to hear about too, given kind of given the composition of the panel here, and before I ask kind of a round robin, Nick, I just want to come back to you, because I think what's interesting is we've been talking a lot about this morning we've been hearing about the technologies, the emerging tech that's out there that's exciting, that's going to change the world and everything like that. I think it's interesting because as a VC, right, you get to see, as an early stage investor, you're going to get to see a wide variety of different technologies that are out there. And I always think it's interesting to find out kind of what you're seeing and what's coming across your desk now that, the reality is not quite yet matching the hype, right? So there's a lot of things that we're all looking at, but what are some of the things that, interestingly, that are coming across your plate that aren't quite there yet, especially as you think about it from the perspective of a large enterprise?
Yeah, I think I'll name two, and both of them are a little bit painful because I care about them both, and we've actually invested in some of it. I still think some of the tools, technology, and things we're seeing in the energy and grid world are still ahead of what's realistic in that environment. And it's extremely important, especially as energy costs and usage skyrocket. We've got a long way to go on figuring out how to make all these different parts move together, especially as we've talked about earlier, the political environment is kind of constantly shifting in and out of favor of increased innovation and investment in energy. The other one is, I hate to say this, is quantum computing is still a little early for us. As I said, we like to invest at the point of commercialization. We've invested in and around quantum and quantum workflows previously. The reality is that this is still a bit of a science problem that isn't fully working or hashed out yet. So these investments today are still several years down the road until they really come to fruition.
Yeah. Gamiel, do you have any, do you want to add anything?
Well, I mean, just fascinating time. I mean, thinking about what's going on. I mean, AI is here to remake entire industry, essentially. If you think about back in 2006 when Amazon announced cloud services, that was the beginning of the cloud war, or whatever. And we watched essentially the whole IT stack get remade. Data centers got remade. We rethought whether we needed data centers. We rethought the data layer. We rethought the security layer. And of course, a whole series of SaaS solutions, business solutions were created on that market. $6 trillion moved from on-prem to cloud first. We've watched that nearly 20 years. We think AI first has sort of the same grist, if you will, the same opportunity. It will be remade in that the data center is now going to be a GPU-based optimized environment. That's not just training and inference, it's all the way to the edge. New construction of that, new power management tools, so deep tech around that. The data layer, we think that there's opportunities around performance and fusion, diffusion stuff, that summarization of data and language models across hybrid models is an opportunity, so we're investing there. We're investing all the way to the top of the stack, and I think the most interesting stuff is the agentic enterprise, whereby every one of us is going to have an agent of some sort, perhaps multiple agents that do work for us, do tasks at narrow levels. There'll be a federation of these tasks. So we think horizontal-based platforms to enable us to individually build agents, this agentic thesis, first in the enterprise at scale, and ultimately at the consumer level is the opportunity. The most exciting company in our portfolio, a company called Semaphore that we've recently launched. This is the team that built Hortonworks, understands open source at scale and how to open source these things. We think there'll be a marketplace of agents, this agentic thesis, which could really transform the entire industry in ways. So at the top of the stack, there will literally be thousands of applications that will support that. So Semaphore, perhaps one that.
That's awesome. Continuing that theme, why don't we end? We'll wrap up with Adam, Nick, and Karen, if I don't mind asking. Can you give us your 30 seconds? So, like, what's not on our plate right now that needs to be, or what's not on our radar that needs to be? That kind of the opposite to the question, Nick, that I posed you. What should we be thinking about over the course of the next few years, or what will we be thinking about over the course of the next few years? Adam, could I start with you?
Yeah, I'm a bit on the pessimistic side. I am one of those AGI may take over, and so I'm cautiously optimistic about where things are going, but I think the next 5 years is pretty unpredictable, but I'm hoping for the best.
Cautious optimism. Nick?
I like that. I consider myself an AI skeptic in a lot of ways. but I think the next few years are huge. It's not necessarily new technology that's going to blow anybody's mind here, but I do think we've gotten mired in this world of like large language models. Everything has to go through a large language model. I think for anybody planning their enterprise and AI rollouts and their compute environments, thinking more about model routing, getting to the right model for different use cases is really going to emerge in the next year. I think 2023 was like, okay, everybody saw what AI can do because ChatGPT put it in your face. Now I think everybody's starting to say, like, all right, how do we actually make use of AI? And the type of model you use should be driven more by what it is you're trying to predict and your other variables of how accurate does the output need to be? Do we need to have explainability? Do we need regulatory and compliance issues, right? Do we need to hit different barriers and thresholds there? Because that will drive the type of model and what model you use, whether it's a large language model or a small language model or a linear regression algorithm. Like sometimes those things work just fine. And that will also drive the kind of, not cloud compute, but the compute environment that you route different workloads to also, because you don't need to pay top dollar at AWS for something. You can have something done in a server in a data center in Kazakhstan somewhere if you're willing to wait a few minutes and pay a lower price for it. So I think we're getting more to like how do we actually piece these things together to get better outputs at a better ROI.
Yeah, I love the model route. Yeah, that's fantastic. Karen, do you mind if I were to end with you and
Yeah.
tell us what you think?
So with the advent of AI, I think that security is super important right now. We've been seeing some deep fakes, synthetic text, synthetic audio, synthetic images. So I think that is going to be a focus for large enterprises to ensure that we have the security level to ensure you are protected from this.
Well, I imagine Deutsche Bank is all over the security and the deep fakes and the synthetics, so that's great. Well, thank you, everyone. We're out of time. Really appreciate everyone attending the symposium. And thank you, Adam, Nick, Gamiel, Karen. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.